Coach, hey, thanks for joining me on this simple coach-to-coach interview. Do appreciate you taking the time. I'm sure it must be frigid up there where you're at, but appreciate you taking the time out of your more than likely busy schedule to sit on the hot seat.
Yeah, I appreciate the warmth of the seat today. Like you said, it was -8 this morning when I woke up.
Yeah.
It's been a pretty mild, fall kind of coming into winter, and then the last 2 days winter hit with kind of full force here.
Yeah, good for you. Then I don't say this very often, but then I'm going to say I'm glad I'm in New Jersey. So
there you go.
All right, Coach, usually my starting point with rookies on the channel is, maybe you could just talk about sort of your soccer journey. How did you end up at Wisconsin Superior?
Yeah, I had a fellow coach a little while back talk about college coaching, and he said it was always the dream, but maybe not ever the goal. And I've kind of stolen that from him. I think when I first got into head coaching at this level, it was it was kind of the dream. That was 17 years ago. I was 24 at the time, and really didn't know didn't really know that I could do this for a full-time gig. At that point, a lot of Division III coaching, a lot of, especially for soccer, was a part-time gig. It was sort of an ad hoc type deal. I kind of hit it at the right time. So I played at UW Superior. I'm from Wisconsin, Northwest Wisconsin, small town, Spooner, Wisconsin. I'm sure you've never heard of it.
I have now.
2,000 people in the town.
Cool.
We had 2 stoplights, in the entire booming city. Grew up, playing with the local club teams here, and was fortunate enough to be coached by my dad kind of throughout my youth journey, and then ended up playing at UW Superior, and then graduated and spent a couple of years teaching. My degree was in secondary education. I was going to be a social studies teacher. Spent a year after school teaching, and then my job got cut, so I ended up back at UW Superior. My girlfriend at the time, who's my wife now, was going to school at St. Scholastica, which is right next door, Duluth, Minnesota. So I came back up to kind of hang out with her, and found my way in doing a bunch of different odd jobs at the university, and then was a volunteer assistant coach that year. And in that year, the head coach, who was my head coach when I was here, left. And so I took over as an interim, and my goal at the time, again, 24 years old, was just, I loved the program, loved the guys that were here, and just wanted to kind of keep the ship afloat until they found somebody who knew what they were doing to come over or come in and take over. So I jumped in, I started recruiting, just kind of getting the schedule set and all that. And, all of a sudden it was, we were kind of coming up on August, and the AD said, well, let's just keep you in for the first year. And we kind of repeated that cycle. I stayed on as an interim head coach for 7 years, which was, I always joke, Paul, that if I would have spent...
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, if I would have spent 3 more years, got to that 10-year mark, I would have gotten a watch or something out of the deal. Then ended up, going through the whole hiring process. And at that point, we'd had enough success where I felt pretty confident that I could get through the interview process and kind of stay in the role. Again, that was 17 years ago is when I took over, and it's just been kind of an evolving journey ever since.
All right, so I have to ask, in that 7 years, did they ever take the interim tag off?
No, and to be honest, I give my AD at the time. He's retired now. But he was my first boss, and he was, I think the best first boss you could ever ask for. I think he looked at it as, man, those first couple of years, if they would have opened the position, there's no way I'm going to get it. I don't even know if I would have gotten an interview right away, And so I think he kind of did it as almost a favor to me, and kind of saw an opportunity to sort of kind of groom me into that role. And eventually we kind of said, well, enough's enough. Let's go through this process and get that interim tag removed. which at a state school, I mean, is, there's obviously a lot of, there's legalities and all
Yeah.
that come into it. So, I had to run the full search and all that, but it ended up working out very well for me in the end.
Yeah. So you kind of found your way into, I'll just say, coaching in general. I mean, are you still surprised by it? I always wonder that, like, when you stumble into a position and you sort of decide to stick with it and you enjoy it. I mean, does it still surprise you that this is what you do for a living, or?
Um, yeah, and I'll say, I mean, the first 5, 6 years, I remember our baseball coach at the time, Eddie Morgan. He's down at Concordia, Wisconsin now, really kind of storied program he's got there. But he was our baseball coach at the time here, and he used to give me grief. He'd walk by my office, on a weekly basis, and he'd come in and he'd say, "Would you put some posters or something up on your walls?" Like all the walls were bare, and I said, I can't do it, Eddie. Like I've got this superstition that as soon as I put something up on the walls, I'm going to kind of feel like it's my own. And that's
Yeah.
when the AD is going to come in and tell me, you've got to apply. And by the way, we've got somebody else lined up. I just felt like I can't do it. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I think even to this day, I don't know if it's surprised, but definitely feel very fortunate, very, very grateful um, for the job and being able to do what I love. I don't know that everybody gets that in their life or in
Yeah.
their career. And so, and to stumble onto it as early as I did and be able to kind of stick with it, I'm very grateful.
Yeah. Yeah. Now at Wisconsin Superior, just looking back, because I'm curious, and this is something I always. How long, as a new coach, when you came on board and you said, "Okay, this is what I'm going to do," like, how long did it take you before you actually thought, like, the program is yours, right? Like, you've been able to influence it enough that it's basically your making. And then, yeah, we'll start with that.
Yeah, I feel like there's a couple different ways to go with that question. I think there's still, I mean, not to get too deep here or anything off the bat, but I do think that there's still, I feel a bit of like an imposter syndrome at times, like just being around the coaches in this conference in this region, uh, and just the wealth of knowledge that a lot of those guys have. I always feel like I'm really, up against giants in this field. And
Hmm.
so, yeah, I don't know that I'll ever feel, fully, like I've got this thing completely figured out.
Hmm.
In terms of, making it my program, um, I think really the goal for me when I first took over was I just wanted legitimacy for the program.
Hmm.
Having played here, and we were not very good when I played, and that gives you an indication of kind of the level of player I was. I was good enough to get by, and I'll leave it at that. But um, you know, uh, the way I kind of always thought about it was just if somebody walked into the mall or into a gas station or something and they were wearing a UW Superior,
Hmm.
you know, hoodie or jacket, I just wanted, our alums, if they were representing us, for somebody else to kind of walk up to them and say, "Oh, you played at UW Superior. You must have been pretty good then, right?" Like that was always the goal, was just to kind of get our program
Hmm.
to sort of that, mark of legitimacy.
Hmm.
Um, and so, I don't know that I've ever really felt like it's been mine. It's more so, I think I'm just the custodian of this thing while trying to provide an experience, a legitimate, soccer or footballing experience for our guys.
Hmm.
And that goes for our current student athletes, and our alumni as well.
Yeah. All right, I got to ask this question because you're a local, um, or a Wisconsinite, so that's what I mean by local. Yeah.
Hmm.
What is it about Wisconsin soccer, right? And only reason I am not shocked, surprised, but I don't know why. Like, the amount of good soccer that comes out of Wisconsin is surprisingly high. And so I'm just curious. I mean, it's obviously the club culture must be pretty strong, but is there any? Do you think there's any secret? And I haven't looked at your roster. That'll be next, but I'm assuming most of your guys come from Wisconsin for the most part. But right, like what is it? I'm really trying to tap into that because
Yeah.
again, it's kind of strange, but the East Coast is the East Coast. It's been the same. I don't know, just kind of gets old. So I'm like, oh, Wisconsin, look what's going. Colorado, how awesome. Texas, the stuff in California.
Hmm.
And so I'm just trying to understand that.
Yeah, I think that so a couple things. Actually, when you get a chance to look at our roster, I'm very proud of the fact that we're about 50-50 domestic students to international students.
I'm just
Um,
wow.
and but I also look at it and say, we're not a program that just outsources talent either.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at some of the NCAA tournament games, we were starting 4, 5, 6 Wisconsin players, born and raised in Wisconsin or Minnesota, but right here in the Midwest, local guys, local ties. But then we also have this cultural influx from the UK, from
Mm-hmm.
Scandinavia, from South America, and it's been a really cool kind of cultural blend.
Mm-hmm.
But I think to kind of answer your question, Paul, about sort of what it is about Wisconsin soccer, especially at the Division III level here. I do think that a big part of it has to do with the UW system, and having a lot of
Yeah.
good UW schools here. And obviously, the WIAC is strong in a lot of
Yeah.
sports. We're no longer part of the WIAC.
Mm-hmm.
We're in the Upper Midwest Conference
Yeah.
with other Wisconsin and Minnesota teams. Um, but there's a real strength, I think, to the UW state system. And for us in particular, I think that we tap into that strength uh, as one of those 13 schools, and that's where we get some of that notoriety, and that's where we're
Mm-hmm.
bringing in, I mean, literally guys from all over the world to complement again guys that have grown up right in our backyard.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a really cool culture to be a part of.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, and I do think that there's a lot to be proud of at the youth level, and
Mm-hmm.
some of the coaches across the state, and just what they've done to sort of foster. Uh, I think of you think of Wisconsin, and I think you think farms and dairyland and all that, and you think of the sports like football that are associated with sort of the
Mm-hmm.
the farm country. And I think that we've done a really good job in the state to embrace soccer and really kind of cultivate almost like a Wisconsin brand to it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what I sense, right? Like, first of all, I didn't know you had the international component to it. I don't mean this in a bad way, but I'm like, Wisconsin superior, right? Like, you get
Hmm.
these international guys, and I could, I get like the private schools, but a state school, I don't, and again, this might be terrible, but I don't. It's not a thought. I don't think, oh, I'm gonna get a bunch of international soccer players to come in from saw Norway, like right, like places where, well, maybe
Hmm.
Norway. It's cold there too. So, um, can I ask what is it about the school? Is there something like thoughtful that the school does to attract those players? Like I mean, it would be nice, I would think, if you're you, like you get to go to all these foreign countries to recruit, but I suspect that might not be the case, right?
Yeah,
Like,
I wish I could say we had this blank check budget where,
yeah,
yeah, I'll fly to Norway for the weekend, hang out with
yeah,
a couple coaches, and right,
yeah,
like, yeah, I
yeah,
mean, and I think like most schools, obviously we're working with, agencies there
yeah.
that are helping kids get placed here in the States, and we've been fortunate to build some relationships with a couple of really good agencies.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think that one of the best things about our school is uh, we do have a really awesome international admissions group. Our head
Yeah.
guy Mark McLean is I literally think he's one of the best, if not the best, in the business.
Uh-huh.
And So when you've got somebody like that you're working hand in hand with, man, it just makes my job a lot easier.
Yeah.
And so because I know that I'm selling a good product then, and I know that
Mm,
these students are going to be taken care of
yeah.
throughout the entire process. They're going to come here, and I mean, you think about like the leap of faith it is to leave your home country. Some of these guys are
Yeah.
going to somewhere where their first language is not English, and so they have never stepped foot on campus here. Some of them never even stepped foot in the States, and
Yeah.
they've got to take this giant leap of faith to come here, and knowing that it's going to be a good experience for them
Mm,
because of the job that our school and again like our international team does. Um, it's really I think like I said it's made my job really easy.
mm,
And on a moral standpoint, just knowing again that this is for a lot of these guys this is the dream to come here and
yeah.
study and play is the dream, and
Yeah.
to know that we're not going to dash that dream. I
Yeah.
would I
Yeah.
would hate for them to get here and it's like, well, it's really not what it was kind of
Yeah.
outlined to
Yeah.
be.
Yeah.
I think we do a really good job of delivering on the end.
Yeah. I tell people all the time, and maybe this is my fascination with Division 3, and it's not just Division 3. It's just the education system, the collegiate education system. Like it is unrivaled in the world. I don't think people get that. Like it doesn't really exist. This notion of a university with a campus and a I don't want to say self-contained environment, but you're pretty much in a self-contained environment, right? Like, if you live in Barcelona, there's a great, I think that's changing a little bit. Where I used to live, you went to, there's a couple universities you could go to, but you lived at home and all that stuff, right? Like, and,
Hmm.
and I just think the experience is remarkably athletics. There's no collegiate athletics really. Um, so yeah, I can totally see if you have the right infrastructure in place from an admissions standpoint, you can capture kids that I mean, even when I was in living in Europe, like kids would die to get the opportunity to come to the States to study. It was just that was the holy grail of their educational process. Let alone soccer, right? Like if it can marry the two.
Well, and I think the big thing for me is, um, I do think like I could go on at length about some of the things just not even in soccer, but just in youth sports in general that
Mm-hmm.
I think
Yeah.
in the U.S. right now I would love to see changed. Some things that I don't think we're getting right, but what I do think we get right is the relationship between scholastics and athletics, and that is, I think, very much um, sort of proprietary to North America, really, but even I would say the U.S. in a big way. And so many of our guys, when we talk to them and say, "Well, why do you want to come to the States and do this?" They talk about uh, the fact that they kind of feel like at whatever age when they're in an academy or club system, like they need to make a choice, like either
Yeah.
pursue sort of their academics and their career after sports at a high level, or pursue sport at a high level. The
Yeah.
the combination of the two is really hard to do,
Yeah.
and we kind of feel, I think, Paul, I think this is a shared sentiment at most universities. Like if we're doing it right, the two entities should really enhance each other. What
Yeah.
you're doing on the
Yeah.
field should enhance your learning in the classroom, and then vice
Yeah.
versa, right?
Yeah. I think, it's interesting that you say that because of one of the thoughts that I've had as of late is like, and I always ask, like, what's the point of some of the things that we're doing at the collegiate level? And I'm looking primarily at Division 1, right? For like, what's the reality of the student athlete to pursue a professional career and all? What's the reality of it? How many of them? It's not that many, right? For the
Hmm.
quantity of kids. And so you're professionalizing an environment where their best outcome is going to be finding a profession or doing whatever. And I think that's why I like Division 3 because there's that recognition, right? Like kids will continue to play, they'll have that ability, but you have this athletic aspect of your life in college. You have your academic, which is the prime reason you're there, and then you'll have a social aspect to that. And I just think to your point, it unlike anywhere else in the world, it is to a certain extent perfectly wedded together. That I think makes all the difference, right? So
Yeah, well, and I think the other thing with Division Three that I think I cherish so much, and I think a lot of others find this as well, is I think that we've got this really cool responsibility that because, and not that nobody goes on to pro, like, I mean, there's D3 guys and gals they'll go
yeah,
on to the
yeah.
pro level, right? Like,
Yeah.
absolutely, right? But for the vast majority, it's sort of like this is the culmination of their athletic experience.
Yeah.
And so from the first time they lace their boots up, they, the goal has been to go and play at the collegiate level. And I look at that as, we really have sort of this standardized time, a finite amount of time. We've got 4 years with these student athletes to really make the most of that sort of culminating experience that they've been looking forward to for, because if we don't get it right at this level, it's kind of like everything was kind of leading to nothing, we just, I don't think any of us as coaches want that for our student athletes. We want to look at it and say, that 5 or 7-year-old kid that dreamed about doing this, when they got to their dream, it was worthwhile and they got something out of this experience.
Yeah. I'm totally, you're preaching to the choir. All right, so I do have to ask you, we're totally going down a rabbit hole.
Let's do it.
What do you think should change in youth soccer? That's another one of my things, but nobody listens to me on it because I'm like, burn it all down. I'm like, no, maybe not burn it all down, but pretty close. So
yeah, and without being reductionist here or overgeneralizing here too much, like maybe I should hold back a bit more, but I won't. Let's be an open book here.
Just so you know, I'm just telling you, this is recorded and it will go up on YouTube and it will be forever. So with that, go out.
All good. Good. I mean, I think that, and again, I don't think this is just soccer, youth soccer, but I think that there's been way too much focus by certain clubs, coaching directors, parents, that this is all supposed to lead toward us creating more. Sorry, go ahead.
Something. It's supposed to lead to somewhere. I totally agree with 100%. Go ahead.
Yep, and it's and I think that so many think that something is either professional or it's we have to create a better national team. Like that's what all of our youth system should be poured into. And as much as I want to see our national team flourish, I don't think that we should make a decision for 13 million kids, 13 million registered soccer players, so that 22 players 10 years from now can do better. I think we're risking the experience for a lot of kids.
Yeah.
And I think that everything that we do at a youth level until a certain age, and I think that age is probably somewhere around like teenage or slightly preteen, right?
Yeah.
Everything we should be doing is designed toward just creating a passion for the sport and a love for the game, and sort of being able to take all those other byproducts out of the sport. The teamwork and the enjoyment and the striving for something. All that should be byproducts of the fact that at age 5 or age 7 or whatever it is, that kid fell in love with the sport.
Yeah.
And whether that kid goes on to be a pro or help our national team do better or anything like that, I don't have any care for that. If we have more kids that fall in love with it, by proxy, we will have better professionals that come out of our youth sports and a better national team anyways. But I just don't think that those should be the deciding factors when we're talking about how to treat 10-year-old kids.
Yeah. That goes to that what you just expressed so much better than I ever am able to express is the point where I ask, what is our purpose? Why are we doing this? Why are we like I do think we are I do think like structurally sort of the vision for just generically youth sports comes down to 22 players. Like that's the end goal, is how do we get kids from 8 years? How do we get a kid from capture him 8 years old so that he could be one of the 22? And I think that is completely absurd. The math doesn't bear it out, right? Like, and I go back to the point, like, and again, this is one of the things that nobody listens to. Is I think by and large, the powers that be, by the time a kid hits 14 years of age, they're known by certain people whether or not they have that ability to potentially be one of those 22 or 30, whatever the roster ends up being, right? Or potentially to be in that pool of U.S. players, 100. You could pick a number, right? It's not just 20. Okay, it's 100. It's 150 pool players. Like, I think they know. And I think everybody else is chasing that. And by the time you're 15, and if you're not getting the knock on the door, it's an inspiring story if you do make it at some point into that pool. But by and large, it doesn't happen. And I think we waste a lot of time with it. And we are focused on what we're trying to teach the kids changes dramatically. I think that's what drives the wanting to win a lot. So that's anyhow.
No, if I could, like, I'll inject one thing to that. You know, our women's softball coach here, Melissa Fracker, she's an East Coast gal herself. Played at WestCon and coached there. She said something to me that I so I'm stealing this from her, and if she listens to this, I'm giving you credit, Fracker. All right. You know, her thought on it is U8, U10. This is any sport, okay? Yeah. U8 and U10. It should be the sole purpose is to get the kids. Your job as the coach or club director, whoever, parent. Your job should be get the kid to fall in love with the sport.
Yes.
And then the way she put it was like U12 to U14, your purpose is to get the kids to ask why. And what she meant by that was essentially like now the kid has fallen in love with the sport, yeah, and they're starting to realize I don't just enjoy the sport, I kind of enjoy being good at the sport. And if I ask these questions and I kind of develop these areas of my game, I'm going to get better. And that's going to lead to more enjoyment. And there's sort of this cycle that goes on if we do it right. And then the way she put it was, and then U16 and U18 is get the kids to buy in. And what she meant by that was now the kid really starts to recognize maybe where their ceiling is or where their goals are. And maybe I want to go and play after club and after high school and all that. And I'm going to buy into now my development gets really small. You know, it's a lot of hours in when you first start playing, it's like every hour you spend playing, you're going to see, yards of growth, right?
Yeah.
And when you're 17, 18 years old, it's 40 hours is going to give you an inch of growth, right? Yeah. And so there's a buy-in that needs to happen then. And I think if we could on a youth sports level, look at that model and adopt that, I think that is the blueprint to making sure that we are still developing, great athletes on the other end of it, but we haven't lost all these other athletes that get burned out or, develop a sort of a cancerous relationship with the sport at some
almost
point
like
along the way.
Almost like a disdain for it because they were miserable playing it.
Yep.
So it's just like human psychology. Why do I want to watch something that made me miserable?
Absolutely.
Right? And we'll end there because this is we're solving youth soccer. But I should have you on separately, and we could just talk about youth soccer.
Love it. Let's do it.
The what I find really interesting, and nobody talks about it. We're not I said this, I tell my kids this all the time. I'm like, we're not making you soccer players to be the professional that everyone aspires to be. We should I think made them, but we should make them into fans of the game. 13 million kids become fans of the game, not these passerbys that play because they have to, or somebody told them, or their dad or mom, whatever the case is, that they fall in love with the game as they're playing so that they are lifelong fans. And I think we miss that by a country mile, by a Wisconsin mile, if that's such a thing. Like, I think
Love it.
that's how far we miss it. And it's a shame. It's a shame, right? And I think that's why you see guys drop off. You know, they don't want to play. They don't want nothing to do with the game. And so it's such a struggle to get young guys to like, hey, support MLS and do all this stuff, right? That's hard work. And that's because we don't prep them for that. But anyhow.
No, I think you're right. And I think if you look at a lot of the MLS fans, and this is not a criticism of the MLS by any means. I think this is actually was really smart by the MLS.
Yeah.
A lot of fans are not necessarily people who played the game.
Correct.
You know, it's a lot of fans are I think a lot of them are actually, you know, not really athletes. They didn't grow up playing many, if any, sports at all. But it's this group that wants something to be sort of you know, excited about and feel like there's a sense of belonging. And so it's kind of like, you know, here in the Midwest, it's kind of like, well, the Vikings and the Packers, like they already have their group of fans. Like I'm not going to be, you know, different at all if I join, you know, the ranks. I'm just kind of joining the game late. But I could go and be a Minnesota United fan and kind of feel like I'm getting in the front door. And so I think it's smart that the MLS kind of reached out to that group. And I think you see that with, you know, whether it's Columbus or Philly or wherever it is, they've done a very good job with that. But I do think that because of the relationship with youth sports, and again, I don't think this is the fault of the MLS. I think this is more of a youth sports problem.
Yeah.
There's a lot of players who could have become bigger and better fans that have dropped off along the way for exactly what you talked about, Paul. Yeah.
Totally agree. I think MLS has done a remarkable job. Right? I'm one of those guys, contrary to popular belief. I think what we've done in 30 some odd years, or what they've done, is nothing short of a miracle, because we've never had that history at that level, whatever. But I do think it would be easier, right? I think it's hard to get the people to want to support MLS, especially with everything going on over in Europe and all this stuff that we can watch now. But I think it would be tremendously easier if our youth soccer environment was much more about, hey, ultimately we want you to be fans of the game. Love it the way I love it. Love it the way you love. Like, I can't get enough talking about it or watching it or whatever. So
absolutely.
All right. So let's get back to Wisconsin Superior. I'm curious. I'm going to ask you this, and could go in 50 different directions. Talk to me about your season. How do you think your season went?
I think it was an amazing ride, and really, truly a special group of players. You know, if you scroll through our schedule, it started off rough. We started out, you know, I think we were 0-2, or maybe 1-2, I guess, in our first 5 games. Played a pretty heavy schedule with, you know, Augsburg is always really tough. Carleton was coming off of an NCAA tournament appearance last year. Played Eau Claire.
Kind of a dark horse too. Like, that's why Wisconsin amazes me. Carleton was a dark horse last year in my book, right? Like, well, where are these guys? But
no, and I thought they were terrific, and you know, they went almost all the way with St. Olaf, who ended up obviously winning the whole thing. So yeah, I mean, and then Platteville was in there as well, and again, obviously they were coming off of a tournament appearance and Sweet 16 this year as well, and so I mean, it was a pretty heavy slate at the start, and we had a really hard time scoring goals, and I give our players a ton of credit for staying bought in when it kind of felt rough. The other thing that we had was we were supposed to open our brand new stadium. We've been waiting for this literally, Paul, since I've been here, we've been waiting for the stadium to happen. It was finally going to happen. And I mean, as construction does, things took longer. One thing led to another, and our season started out with me, in a meeting telling our players we didn't get our stadium done in time. So we partner with our local high school, and the high school's done a great job. They've been very good hosts to us, but it felt like a real kick in the shorts. Yeah. And in large credit to our administration here and the work that they did with our contractors there, we did get to play on it, but it was midway through the season. So it ended up being a really big bonus to us, midway through, kind of a real shot in the arm. But that's kind of how the season started. And again, I give our players an immense amount of credit for that's not easy, for a 21, 22-year-old kid or young man to think like there's a lot going wrong here. Like this is not the senior year that this was supposed to be. And I think a lot of them could have jumped ship and instead they really doubled down. And I think the really cool thing that we have here, Paul, is like, there is a real care for one another that I see with this group of guys that I just have not seen in any other program or anything else that I've shadowed or witnessed. And I think that doubling down was, we can be kind of upset about the way our results are going right now. We can be upset with the facilities factor, all that stuff. But all that's going to do is take away from other guys in this program, and I'm not willing to do that. So I am just going to pour more into it. Mm-hmm. And when you get 30 dudes willing to do that, things got really good.
Your stadium, is that the foot? It looks like, is it the one with the track? Is that the one?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just looking at a campus map. I tried looking for pictures as you were talking. I love that stuff. You don't have a football program, do you?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, wait.
And I say this all the time in recruiting. Just as a sports fan, I would love to have a football team. Saturday afternoon, tailgating, all that kind of stuff, right? But as a soccer guy, not having to compete with resources and fans and really kind of feel like we're the premier sport on campus here. Yeah. It's a bonus for sure.
Yeah. That's a big deal. I've been saying where I went to school, Mount Union, like I joke on the time. It's like, I think it's time for Mount Union. I have another theory, but I think it's time for Mount Union and that we should, as alumni and all that stuff, the soccer team should get their own field and not play in the football stadium. But by and large, on the whole, I think every school, and I know there's limitations, so I accept all those, but every school that has a soccer program, men's, women's, and even lacrosse, they should have their own place to play. I just think it's matured enough. There's all that stuff. It's time. So I love to see when there's soccer specific fields and not the lines that make me twitch.
Right.
What was your highlight for the season?
The easy answer is making the Sweet 16 for the first time in school history, in conference history. I think more so than that, though, we set it out as a goal at the beginning of the year. A lot of guys sat in my office last year in our postseason meeting. We talked about goals for next year, and I'd say at least 90% of our guys said we talked way too much about the NCAA tournament this year, and we talked way too much about being a national champion this year. Mm-hmm. And so this group of seniors had never won an NCAA tournament game. They'd been there for 3 years in a row, but had never won a game. And they'd been first round exit to Wash U, a terrific storied program, obviously. Yeah. To North Central in Naperville, Illinois. And then last year we're first round exit in the worst kind of way to St. Olaf, who obviously went and won the national championship, but we didn't make it much of a game. We lost 7-1. Yeah. And and if you watch the game, like, was it really 7-1? Maybe not, but like, no question. I mean, like, we got steamrolled, right?
Yeah.
And we had spent a lot of time in the year talking about, like, our goal is to go win a national championship, and then we get, just bulldozed in the first round. And so our guys really kind of, they all said, we just want to win one NCAA tournament game before we leave here. And I get the sentiment of that, but honestly, like, I left those meetings thinking, like, I'm not okay with that. I'm not, and not that, like, that wouldn't be great, and we shouldn't be proud of. I mean, it's hard to win NCAA tournament games, but if we're going to set a goal, then let's set a goal for the very top, or let's set a different goal. Was kind of my feeling. And so I kind of stewed on that for, I mean, about 6 months, and maybe a week before preseason, I kind of, like, I remember the moment, Paul. I was driving to work, and I said, our goal should be, this group of guys is so special. Our goal should just be, let's play as many games with this group as possible.
Yeah.
And if that's,
let the rest take care of itself.
Yeah, right. Like it.
Yeah.
And so what I was so proud of was that our guys really bought into that. And, we get the draw to go play North Park. They're ranked number 9 in the country. Terrific season. Obviously a ton of tournament experience in that group and in that program. And it was not about, well, we got to beat these guys if we want to go win a national championship. It was about, if we want to survive and we want to play tomorrow with the same guys in this locker room, then here's what we have to do.
Yeah.
And I feel like when we did that, then it made the task of going and playing St. Olaf in the second round, the team that waxed us last year, it became a much more realistic target that, we did it yesterday, let's do it again today.
Yeah.
And then I felt the same, like when we went up against Amherst, who obviously, they were runners up last year, they won the whole thing this year. I feel like our guys really were up for anything. And, we go down 2-0 to Amherst, and I feel like they had every sort of right to kind of just mail it in at that point. And rather than that, they doubled down. We scored 2 goals. We get right back in the game. And, we were about 90 seconds away from going into Pens against the eventual national champ. So, long answer to your question, Paul, but I think it's that kind of sequence of moments. That's what really highlighted the year.
Yeah. I actually thought you were going to pull it off against Amherst. I thought you had the momentum when you tied it up. I just thought all bets are off, and Amherst is showing that they're vulnerable. And I thought you were going to pull it off. But Amherst is Amherst, like they can look like they're out of a game for 90 minutes, and then in the last minute score 2 on you and you're done. Like it's just they're that they got a switch. That's just remarkable. But
absolutely. And I think that's huge credit to Justin, and I think if you talk to any one of his players, like, it's like he gets them to believe, and to be ready to run through that brick wall. And now you do that with a group of guys, and there's a lot of very special players in that group. And it's almost like they're hidden a bit because it's not just one guy. But at any point, any one of those dudes is ready to take over a game or, make history and make or create a special moment. And that's, that's what an NCAA championship team should be, right?
Yeah. Like, you don't know. You think you know who the threats are, and then you turn around and it just so happens to be the guy who you thought was the weakest player on the left, or whatever, right? You're like, oh my gosh, he just killed us, right? Like,
Yeah, and you're literally describing it too. Jacob Dinzio, freshman kid, not the weakest player by any means. Terrific player, but it's he's a freshman kid. He's from Minnesota. Watch the kid growing up playing, right? Like, and he took over especially in the overtimes. We just didn't have an answer for that player. And again, it's not weakest player by any means, but you kind of think, well, you've got some of these senior guys, you kind of figured them out a little bit, but this dude and I think he had an amazing 6-game stretch, really,
Yeah.
through the NCAA tournament. Terrific player.
All right, so if you haven't noticed, we're dressed in completely different outfits. I have a new hat on, and we're recording this on day 2. For the first time, my JOB, in all of my interviews, for the first time, my JOB did not appreciate my YouTube influencing and interrupted our conversations yesterday. So I do appreciate you hopping back on. I did mention again Tudor Flintham, who's at Gustavus, just announced his departure. So it's not a reflection of Wisconsin Superior. It's just me giving a shout out to Tudor. So, all right, Coach, let's hop back into it. I do want to ask you, who is the best team you faced this year?
Well, first, Paul, thanks again for having me back on to finish the conversation up. And I'll just say this is the first ever podcast where I've had a wardrobe change during it. So, I kind of feel like you and we both hit the big time, man. This is cool.
Yeah. Next time it's the hair. Like we'll have a hairstylist for each and some makeup. Yeah.
I love it. Yeah, that sounds good.
That's awesome.
That sounds good. Yeah, I mean, best team that we faced this year. Oh man.
You faced some good ones. Let me just say, your schedule is pretty rocking, by the way. I mean,
yeah.
So
yeah. I mean, you've got to give credit, obviously, to the eventual national champs, Amherst. I think, and if nothing else, I think the most different style that we faced. Credit to them. Again, I think the momentum shifts in that game. They're up 2-0. They really hadn't been down very often in the season, and you could kind of see, some of the life drain out of them a little bit when we went to, 2-1 and then eventually 2-2. And again, it's credit to a team that's been in the tournament many times, to a coach that knows what he's doing and has the trust and belief of his guys to kind of stop the hemorrhaging and get back into that game and obviously go on and win the game. Because I think if we get into penalties, it truly is 50-50 at that point. And, to score with less than 90 seconds left in the second overtime, or, just over 90, whatever it was. I mean, it was right down to the wire. And that is a national championship side.
Yeah.
I think, probably the best player that we saw all season, to me, Nathan Donovan at UW Eau Claire.
He's
an absolute
he's a
key code.
different level forward. Such a natural in front of goal. He's one of my, I'll just say it now, he's one of my top 11 players in the country. Like
100%. Yeah, and I think if he stays healthy through the NCAA tournament, Paul, I think he's got a good shout for player of the year. A terrific kid, terrific young man. Heartbroken for him. I was watching the Platteville Eau Claire game when he went down, 2 minutes left in the game, and just heartbroken for him. But he'll bounce back. D3 will be done for him, but I think there's a future if he wants to keep playing. I hope he gets healthy, and whatever that young man ends up in, I saw him at the tournament game, right after our game, and just big warm smile, big, hug from him. He's just, there can be an ego that goes along with a talent like that, and he just doesn't have it. He's just a good dude. The other shout I would give is the guy, that plays for the hat that you're wearing, Jared Hecht. I mean, again, you talk about a cheat code. I thought we had Gustavus, kind of figured out a little bit when we were there. They swapped him from a center back up to a forward, and now all of a sudden he's just, he's a difference maker at whatever part of the field they need to put him in. I mean, a lot of terrific players this year. Those are probably two of them that stand out for me.
What was there any point in the season where you thought like, hey, I think we got something really good here? I always saw it's like that. I don't want to say at a turning point, because I don't think you necessarily, maybe you did, but you sort of get that sense, like you're a glimpse of how you played, where you're like, man, we're actually really good. At least that's my experience with teams. Like sort of go through and I'm so knee deep in the nuance of it, and then I'll for whatever reason I'll just sit back and watch, and I'll be like, holy smokes, we're a little bit better than I think we are, and then you're like, okay, let's ride the momentum. Was there any point like that in the season for you?
You know, I think there's been for the last few years here been, and I don't want to speak, arrogantly about our team or anything like
Mm-hmm.
that. I think we've had the talent to do special things for the last few years. Um, so we had the team over to our house for a campfire, and we do some team bonding stuff and all that in the preseason. My wife Rachel is an absolute saint. Cooked for the whole team, and then went and made desserts for the whole team. And I'm like, Rach, like burgers would have been fine, and she just went all out. She and my girls, I have three daughters. I mean, they love the team, and Paul, that's why I do what I do. Anyways, we had the team out, the last week of August, and when they all left, I was cleaning up with Rach, and there wasn't much to clean up. I mean, our guys, like one of the guys vacuumed, one of the guys was wiping down the tables, one of the guys was cleaning the window. I mean, it was just like, guys, like you could just clean up your plates and be done. But like the group, I mean, they just, So anyways, we're cleaning up kind of the last scraps, and I said to her, I said, that's the team. Like this is the team that is going to do something special, and so not necessarily based on talent. Again, I think we've had probably similar talents kind of year to year, but this group really had something special in terms of like the chemistry, in terms of the care for one another, the buy-in to kind of our process. Um, you know, Last year we talked a lot kind of throughout the season about going and trying to win a national championship and do something we had never done. And the response that I got after the season, Paul, from just about every one of my players in our individual meetings was, we got to stop talking about winning a national championship. We haven't won a single game yet. This group hadn't won a single game in the NCAA tournament. We just need to start with one. Like, we need to win one. And man, when they that just didn't sit right with me. And I forgive me. Did I tell this story yesterday?
No. You mentioned
no,
it.
Okay.
That's okay. Keep going.
Yeah. I kind of thought, like, rather than just trying to win a tournament game or winning the national championship, this group, there is something special here, and we should try to play as many games as we can together. Let's make that the goal. Just play as many games as we can together. And when our group bought into that and then doubled down on that throughout the season in preparation of the tournament, like, I just knew that there was going to be an element of like zero quit in this group. And again, just the purpose was not to go win a shiny trophy or anything like that. The purpose was just to keep playing with each other. And when they adopted that purpose, I knew we could do something special.
Yeah. I will say you did something right. Like, it's funny. You made it to the Sweet 16 and almost took down the eventual national champion, right? Like, let's be clear about that. You made a roaring comeback, and like you said, you were 90 seconds away. So it's remarkable in of itself. It's interesting that you say that, and I'm always interested in the psychology of the soccer player, which always seems unique, right? Like, it's very easy to get ahead of yourself as a player, right? You think you got it, you got all the swagger in the world, and then that's when the game bites you and tells you, hey, this is not your game. This is right.
Right.
It has a way of humbling you, and I think that's the ultimate, is like, hey, how do you stay as humble as possible and just focus in on, we got a game next, Tuesday. Hey, that's awesome. Let's play that game. Everything else, we don't care what we did in the past. We don't care what we did, what we're going to do down the road, but we just know Tuesday we're playing a game, and that's it. And it's the hardest thing to do, but when you do capture it, it goes a long way for a team or for a player. But
well, yeah, and I think, Paul, like, you're right. Like, you've got to have confidence
Yeah.
to play, right?
Yeah.
But you always run the risk of being overconfident, right?
Yep.
And I think the other thing that I think is really tricky with the psychology of, and I'm sure this goes across the board in other sports,
Yeah. Yeah.
but I'll just speak to soccer because I know it. You've got to be able to, how to put this, like that humility that you talked about, the humbling experiences, and I think maybe it is more prevalent in soccer just because I think it is the one sport where the better team doesn't always win.
Yeah.
Like I think of like American
Yeah.
football. If you're
Yep.
the more physical,
The
better team,
math,
more skilled,
yep.
better prepared, you're going to win the
Your
game.
odds are better for, yeah. Yeah.
9 out of 10 times, right?
Yep.
But like
Yep.
soccer, it's just because it's so hard to score. You could outshoot
Yeah.
a team
Yeah.
30-2, but they score on one chance and you don't,
Yep.
and you're going home. So like I think that there's a part of our psychology as soccer coaches and soccer players that you almost try to protect yourself against those big heartbreaks.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think the trick is to lock into the vulnerability of, look, we can go out there and, maybe we do lose a game we're supposed to win. That is the sport. But if we kind of resign to that before the game even starts, we'll protect ourselves from the big
Yeah.
heartbreaks,
Yeah.
because we never really let ourselves believe or dream,
Yep. Yeah.
right? But because you never believed, you never gave yourself a shot in those games.
Yeah. 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 Very true. Very true. Like I said, the psychology is remarkable, and I do think, like you said, the the big difference, I think, between soccer, I don't know hockey enough. I would think it might be similar, where, right, if the math is saying one team is that much better than another, you can pretty much bet. And Vegas makes a ton, and Atlantic City, they make tons of money off of this sort of thing, right? Like,
Hmm.
you can pretty much bet that that team is going to win their game. And in soccer, all bets are off once the whistle blows, right? Like,
Absolutely.
everything else is just, as it's been said, it's all theory, right? Like, it's 90
Yeah.
minutes in a ball and everything else is theory. So it really interesting, really interesting. You don't, I mean, this is weird, but you don't have a sports psychologist on staff, do you?
So we don't have one on staff, but we do. Our head counselor on campus here,
Mm-hmm.
and actually he started a whole center, the Pruitt Center here on campus, which is just for mindfulness and well-being.
Mm-hmm.
And he came to me about 8 years ago and asked if he could work with our team.
Mm-hmm.
And there is no question in my mind that 8 years ago was also the first year that we won a conference championship, first year that we went to the NCAA tournament.
Interesting.
That was the unlock for us.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Randy Barker's his name. I mean, and just a terrific guy. So he does a lot of work with our team. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure many teams are in the same boat where it's, you're on a Division III budget. We don't have the
Yeah.
resources
Yeah.
to have somebody on staff, but
Yeah.
the work he does, and then we've got another guy that has done some work with us too. One of my alums actually, Zach Harworth, went on and got his doctorate in sports psychology at the University of St. Thomas. So
Mm-hmm.
he's done some work with our team,
Wow.
and come in and done some seminars and worked with guys, kind of on an individual
Yeah.
basis. He now got picked up. This is pretty cool. Kind of side note here, Paul, but he is now working for the United States Air Force.
Oh, wow. Very cool.
Working with fighter pilots, and
Wow.
like you talk about like high performance mentality. You talk about high stakes.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
we get it wrong and we lose a game, right? Like
they get it
we
wrong.
come back to work tomorrow. You get it wrong there. It's like, I mean, best case scenario, you just crash this $1 billion jet.
Yeah.
Worst case scenario, like it's literally life and death, right? So
Yeah.
the psychology of fighter pilot, like there's some pretty cool stuff out there, and he's working with the best of the best. Pretty cool.
Well, I'll throw this out there. If either one of them is interested in a short interview, I would love to have somebody like that on, because this is the sort of thing that totally intrigues me. Intrigues me. And I think it's a relatively new, not sports psychology. I think it's, we're going on a couple decades of where sports psychology, but I do think it's coming into its own where that sort of stuff matters. And it could be a generational thing. That stuff matters for players today more than ever.
Well, I think the other thing that we're realizing is, like, I think sports psychology is going to be kind of like the new nutrition. It was
Yeah.
like,
Oh, yeah. Very good.
like
Great
15, 20
analogy.
years
Yep.
ago, it was kind of like just, you
Eat
lift weights,
well.
you run, you do all that, you're doing everything you need to do. And it's like,
Yeah.
well, hey, if you feel your body a different way, right? Like
Yeah.
so, so we look at it as, I mean, there's three things you can train any sport. You
Yeah.
can train your craft, your body, your mind. And I
Yeah.
think that's one, it's like that third
Yeah.
pillar is the untapped resource right now
Yeah.
where it's like,
Yeah.
and I think we used to think, Paul, like, like we knew sports psychology existed. We knew that there were players out there, a Michael Jordan who's just,
Yeah.
everybody talk, he's got that clutch gene, right? Like
Yeah.
he can
Yeah.
handle pressure and adversity. And like
Yeah.
the
He
thing is,
just
like,
has
that's not
something
just
we don't have.
right.
Yeah.
It's,
Yeah.
yeah, but I think there's a lot of science to prove that it's not just innate. It's not just,
Yeah.
you have it or you don't. You can train, confidence or dealing with adversity or dealing with pressure or, communication, being able to accept feedback and criticism, all those things you could train just like you could
Mm-hmm.
train in the weight room.
Yeah. You know what? And that's a good point. In baseball, you do, I think, generally speaking. But it's interesting how you don't see or hear players being talked about in terms of being in a slump as much as they used to, right? Like underperforming. They have bad games here and there, but by and large, they are at a level where they are performing consistently across the board. And I gotta believe some of that is the psychology of it. And I'll just say, especially at our level at Division 3, what would it mean if and it could be you've already experienced it, right? Like your players overperform where they're at today by 25%. I don't know if you could quantify it or, hey, we're going to, of all of our games, 25%, we're going to be better 25% of the more than in the past. What does that do for your games, your records, all that kind of stuff? I just think it flows. I think it is a natural progression of how we get athletes to perform every
Well,
day. So,
yeah, if you start throwing numbers out there, Paul, I think like the way that we kind of quantify it, we'll ask all of our guys, like, how valuable do you think the mental game is to your ability to be successful? If you could put a percentage on it, is it 50% of your game is
yeah.
mental? Is it 75? The most common response, or I guess the average of responses, is somewhere around 70, 75%
Mm-hmm.
is what guys say.
Yeah.
So then we ask, okay, how much of your training is devoted to mental training, right? And it's all of a sudden, it's like, well, I don't do anything, or, just scratching the surface.
Yeah, I don't know.
So, yeah. And I don't know that it needs to be like, we're probably not going to spend, if we train for 2 hours, we're probably not going to spend an hour and a half of that on, mindfulness or meditation or breath work or whatever.
Yeah.
But I think that we can very much be intentional with it and make sure that we do get a daily dose of it.
Yeah. And then, like I said, you're not looking to, hey, we're going to double our performance levels because we're so strong psychologically that nothing can stop us. Like, that's not what you're looking for, right? I just think it's degrees. Like, how can you, especially even at our level, like these are high performing athletes in their own right? And so how do you get those high performing athletes to perform just that little bit more? Because that could be the difference between, again, when you go up against, well, you beat him, but St. Olaf, right? Like you go up against St. Olaf or Gustavus or somebody, maybe that psychological edge where you're like not intimidated and you're feeling confident about your game and you're doing all the things right. Like maybe that's just enough. That gives you enough push to get you in position to score goals and win the game. Right? That's
well, I'll tell you, Paul. I mean, you're 100% right. And if I could just kind of keep going on a deep dive here a little bit, like,
feel free.
Yeah. So, one of the things that we worked on leading up to the national tournament. So again, this group of guys had never won a national tournament game.
Yeah.
And a big part of the sports psychology is imaging or call it imagination, whatever you want to call it. But essentially, what image do you have in your mind? And I think that what our players had, especially our upperclassmen, was this image that we go to the NCAA tournament and we get bounced. Something happens. You know, we
and that's seared in your brain like every time.
Yeah. I mean, our last 2 years, I mean, so you go back to 2022, all these guys were freshmen and sophomores that year. We're up 2-1 against North Central, you know, Enzo's team there, fantastic team. You know, the game is tied 1-1. We go up 2-1 with 4 minutes left in the game, and we concede twice in the last 4 minutes to lose 3-2.
Yeah,
that's their NCAA tournament experience, right?
Yeah.
And then the next year, like we talked about yesterday, we go get absolutely thumped by the freight train that was St. Olaf last year, and J.O., you know, Justin, a great friend of mine, like terrific dude, like just if it couldn't be us, I was happy it was them. But I mean, we got waxed. I mean, 7-1. So that was, for a lot of our guys, the image of the NCAA tournament was we're going to go there and we're going to watch the last couple seconds tick down the clock, and we're going to look over and we're going to see, you know, our best friends all crying because their season or their career just ended. We're going to have to call home to mom and dad and say, we didn't get it done, you know, and like that was the image. And so what our counselor, Randy, who came in and did was a mindfulness exercise and an imaging exercise where, you know, essentially look at kind of take you through a little bit of a mindfulness exercise. And at the end of it, it was, now we're going to watch the scoreboard tick down 10, 9, 8, but we're winning the game. Okay. And now look around and see your teammates. And what do you see? You see the celebration, you see the joy, you feel it, right? And I think that by putting that in our guys' mind, it gave us the wherewithal that, you know, so you look at the St. Olaf game, and again, you've got a guy like Shea, you know, on a team like that, like
different level,
can score at any point, and he did. We're up 2-1 in the game. He scores with 3 minutes left, and it's 2-2. And the danger for our guys, I heard one player say it as we came off from regulation, was we almost had him.
Yeah.
You know, we almost had him, and it was like that minute of like the NCAA tournament is happening to us again, right?
Yeah.
And the rest of the guys like just had the mindset, like just because that was our experience before doesn't mean it has to be now. And they all put that image back in their mind of winning. And I think it was, not only was it like the image was there for them, but also like if all you have is negative images running through your mind, all you're doing is sort of being adverse to those images. You're trying not to let that happen, rather than have a positive image and work toward it.
Yeah.
And we all know, like the kind of the act of chasing something, working towards something, is always going to be more productive than being adverse to something, right?
Yeah.
So that's what that's like. It's one example of, I think, what that mindfulness and that sports psychology can do for players.
Yeah.
And you nailed it. In an NCAA tournament, better place than any.
Yeah. That's funny because it is true, right? Like, and I could think of games where like just the negative connotation to it, and here you're taking this great, and it's human nature, right? Like this great thing that happens that not everybody gets to experience. We're going to the NCAAs, and if your experience is every year you get waxed or you get knocked out or whatever the case may be, when you think of the NCAA, what's your first reaction? Like if you get a bid again, you're like, yay, oh crap, here we go again, right? Like it's, and it's not intentional. It's just sort of the way your brain works, right? And that's why we're funny species that way, right? Like we don't think about, oh, what a great opportunity and we can take this. No, your immediate response is like, oh, I remember this and I remember that, and look where we ended up. Yeah. That's remarkable.
Yeah, and it's not, don't have those thoughts.
Yeah.
Because then it's inauthentic. If you just say, well, we're not, you know, like, oh, great, like we're going to play we're in the pod with St. Olaf again.
Yeah.
This is perfect. This is what we wanted. Well, you're not being truthful.
Yeah.
So it's not saying don't have the thought. It's be aware of the thought and then ask questions about it.
Yeah.
Does this mean we're going to go and lose? Does this mean that we have to lose the same way we did last year?
Yeah.
No, it doesn't, right? So it's actually having conversations with your inner self. It's pretty cool stuff.
Yeah.
Are
That's
you,
that.
Paul? Are you a Ted Lasso fan?
Not really, not particularly, but
Oh
yeah,
man,
I
okay,
follow. All right, yeah.
okay.
Why? What's the phrase he uses in this case?
Well,
That would be
I
applicable.
think it's there's a scene. So I loved Ted Lasso,
Uh-huh.
like, and it's corny and it's whatever, but I just loved it.
It's okay.
And I think what I loved about it the most was that all of my like non-soccer friends, like
Uh-huh.
guys that don't get it. I mean, even my wife, who was a soccer player, but doesn't have the same passion for it,
Yeah.
or whatever. Everybody that maybe doesn't have the same passion that I do had
Mm-hmm.
a passion for this show and
Show.
loved
Yeah,
it.
yeah,
And
yeah.
so it was my connection to everybody
Yeah,
I've been
everybody.
trying to connect to the game, right?
Yeah.
So, but there's a phrase in there, he talks about after I think they're leading up to a big match, and he talks about, there's a phrase in the UK that it's the hope that kills you. And he
Mm-hmm.
goes on to say, like, that's not, like, he doesn't like that phrase. He goes
Yeah.
on to say, like, it's the hope that you really, dream for and should be craving.
Yeah.
And I'm paraphrasing big time here and probably butchering it, but I think that is the
Yeah.
thought is like, we can't kill the hope before we've even
Yeah.
started to play.
Yeah. 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 That when you said it has to be authentic in how you look at a game, otherwise it's like you said, it's contrived, I think. And I think that's where that's where I see a lot of people do, like, hey, just because you're saying it in front of a mirror 50 times so that you think you believe it, it's still there, right? Like that thought that you had originally is still there and you haven't necessarily dealt with it. I guess we're getting really deep psychology
No, I
here,
love this.
therapy and all that stuff. But
This is
but
where I
it
geek
it
out, Paul. Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
please.
But it's that thought, that negative thought is still there. You haven't dealt with it. You've just managed to layer a bunch of bullshit on it. That's the first time I cursed. Oh my God, what this is a
Maybe I have that effect, man.
yeah, but you know what I mean? Like you layer just stuff on it that is you know is a an inch deep, mile wide. There's no depth to it, and so at the first moment of a challenge or it not going your way, all of that BS that you piled on top of that negative thought goes away and you're left with your negative thought still and you're like, "Oh my God, that's why it's there," right? Anyhow, yeah. So,
Yeah, absolutely. No, you let the thoughts kind of control you, and I
yeah.
think that, again, it's not that the thoughts should not exist, and if
Yeah.
we kind of, there's like a phrase in psychology of, passing judgment on it, right? So
Yeah.
like, it's not so much like saying like, well, that's a negative thought, like push it out of my head, or that's, it has no place here. It's the thought exists, be aware of the thought, and
Yeah.
then be aware of what you can do about the thought. You can either
Yeah.
let that thought kind of control you.
Yeah.
You can
Or
say,
you can
because that
take
thought
it, be like,
exists,
"Oh,
like,
that's that thought. I'm just going to dismiss it," right? Like,
yep, you
yeah.
could push off, push
Yeah.
back on it.
Yeah.
I think of it as like, and again, maybe I'm getting too weird here or whatever, but like, I'm a big visual guy, big analogy guy, Paul. Okay,
Yeah.
so like, I think of it as like, think of like if you're in a river, okay, and all these thoughts, positive, negative ones, are just leaves floating down the river, right?
Yeah.
And this negative thought comes your way, you can either hang on to it, so
Yeah.
this leaf comes your way,
Yeah.
you can either hang on to it,
Oh,
let
yeah.
it get hung up on you,
Yeah.
you can move it aside, or you can simply like just step out of the way and let it float
Yeah.
by,
Yeah.
and that's the way I've kind of chosen to kind of like
So,
think
yeah.
about those
Yeah. Yeah.
thoughts. And
Yeah. Yeah.
for everybody, whatever works for you,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's different for everyone, but like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
have a
No,
process. Yeah,
this is probably way, we're so gone, it doesn't matter.
I love it.
Right. Like I quit drinking 5 years, 6 years ago. And that was one of the lessons that I had to learn. Like, cause I am a retain the negative thought about whatever. And it just builds and builds and builds. And knowing that the thought is there, that it doesn't have to control me has taken me ages to figure out. Like it's I'm 56 and I'd say I matured a little bit when I turned 50, like that's when things started to make sense. But anyhow, we this is like I'm going to lie down now. Let me tell you about my
Yeah.
childhood. That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
You know what? Like I said, it is. I going back to what we said earlier. Like I do, it's not undiscovered. You know what I mean? Like, oh, this is something that we're talking about that is so innovative, and it's there. It's just to the extent that it gets used in programs, I wonder about, because I do think it's like you said, it's a three-legged stool, and I think this is the one area where there's so much opportunity, especially because it's so culturally acceptable now to talk about
Hmm.
psychology, about things. And I was on a business trip the last couple of days. I think I mentioned the last time, and I passed by Mount Union where I went to school, and I mean, of all places, there I am in the bathroom, and they have the post kids make the 8 by 11 posters of things, and they're all related to how are you dealing with stress, how are you doing this. So it's just accept, if I were to go in, I was just say, if I were a student now and I went in and I said, look, I'm having a lot of anxiety, I'm struggling with drinking, and I'm doing, and I'm whatever, all these things,
Hmm.
people would have looked at me like, dude, you got problems, right? And just sort of whatever, and you got to get help, and you can talk to people. Back in my day, it was like you couldn't even say it, because then
Yep.
it was just. So anyhow, that
Well,
that's
I
that's
think,
why I say it's one of the things that, if there is a time to embrace the sports psychology of it and applying it to soccer players in a program, now is the time, because it's so acceptable to start talking about the mental aspects of the things that impact you. And right, as a student athlete, what's affecting you on the field could be affecting your personal, your student side, and what's going on as a student could be affecting you as an athlete, right? So
well, and I think, Paul, if I could kind of just bring it around here, you know, I think that there is still, it's still hard to get guys to buy into this. Okay.
oh, totally,
Um,
totally.
and
Especially
I think a
guys, I
big,
think. Yeah, yeah,
what's that?
yeah.
Oh,
I
yeah,
think
no,
guys,
I think you're right.
right? Like,
Yep. I
I think
think
it's
you're right.
us. I think it's an us
Yep.
thing. Yeah, yeah.
Yep.
But
Yep. And that's generalizing. I'm sure that
yeah,
I mean, there's plenty of women's athletes too that
yeah,
struggle with trying to get on top of this. But I do think that there is a stigma that has been traditionally related to men
yeah.
that makes it tough.
Totally, absolutely.
I think that the other thing is it's kind of like for athletes to say, well, I've gotten this far, I've gotten to be really good at my
Yeah,
craft, and I've never touched the psychology piece.
yeah,
So why would I? I don't want to mess
yeah,
things up. I
yeah,
don't want
yeah.
to start overthinking things or.
Mm-hmm,
So that's one thing that we battle when we're trying to get guys bought into it. Okay.
mm-hmm.
Um, I think that it's there's a notion that I can just do this on my own,
Yeah,
and it's like you probably can. For a lot of people, you probably can.
yeah,
I
yeah,
can. You know, I could build my own house.
yeah.
I don't know that I'm going to want to live in it. Like, I think the walls are going to come down
Yeah,
pretty quick, I think,
yeah,
but like I could do it, or I could find somebody that is professional in this realm, and at the very least have them help me, with that
guide
journey,
me,
right? So
coach
like,
me, right, through this, because I
yeah,
don't know what I'm doing. Yeah,
and I think the other thing is we at times we look at mental health and we say, well, if I'm not struggling at the moment, it
yeah,
means that I'm mentally healthy, right?
yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
and we think of
Totally.
mental health as just like it's always an issue. We're
Yeah,
struggling, and that is part of it. There's
yeah,
always a spectrum, and it's kind of like
yeah,
being at neutral is fine,
yeah,
but can we do things to make sure that we will dip below
yeah,
neutral,
yeah.
we'll dip into the negative side,
Yeah,
but when we do we have tools and resources so that
yeah,
we don't dip as deep?
yeah,
And when
yeah,
we're at neutral, that doesn't mean that we're thriving either. Like
yeah,
we might be doing really well, but if we did some work with our psychology, could we push
yeah,
further? You
yeah,
know, and I think that's where it gets really exciting.
yeah, yeah. It is. There is that stigma or whatever, that something has to be wrong for me to adopt some things, and then it's kind of like with medicine, and I tell folks this all the time, right? Like you're sick, you take medicine, and then you feel better. Okay, I'll stop the medicine. And this
Hmm.
is a case where maybe it's not medicine, but you don't want to stop taking it. You want to keep doing it because it does arm you for when those eventualities where you're dealing with things that might be outside of the normal range. And to your point, I call them normal people because I don't consider myself that. Right? There's normal people who can deal with stuff and figure things out and great on them and they could do it. I'm just not. I don't believe a lot of people are, right? Like I don't think there's a lot of normal people. I think everybody deals with things in their own way, and that's so.
I think
Yeah.
anybody can use help. And again, like this
Correct.
is not
Correct.
just
Yeah. Yeah. This
right.
is
Like
not just a health like good bad thing, and this is more about
yeah,
hey, how do you learn the tools to be like hey, I'm angry at the driver in front of me and I'm going to get all worked up and be angry at the driver in front of me. And it's going to stay with me all day. And I'm going to constantly think of that guy. Well, how do I deal? How can I be like, that guy's driving me nuts? Okay. And then it goes away. You forget about it. Right. Like, I think that's the thing that I think people would learn or have the capacity to learn about when we talk about this stuff. So.
absolutely. I appreciate you letting me geek out here, Paul, on this. Like that was a really good kind of
Yeah,
rabbit hole. And
this
man,
is.
if nobody else enjoyed it, I certainly did.
Oh
So thank you for that. Yeah.
yeah. No, it's a big piece, right? Like I said, and look, I've said like I wouldn't want to grow up now. I wouldn't want to be. I'm sure I would. Give me a few more years, I'll be like, man, I wish I was young again. But like all this stuff that they have to deal with, which is different than what I had to deal with, but all that stuff, it's got to be very, very difficult. Very, I think, again, me on the outside, and I saw with my kids like how some of this stuff is really hard and really challenging because you live in a modern age, right? And all the things of modernity and all that kind of stuff, the information and the tools and all that stuff. And, and it's just very hard. And I think this is the sort of thing that helps them go through that and realize that there's a lot of great things going on, and you can go through life and and be the person that you're intended to be, and you have all the things you need from a healthy lifestyle in your head that makes it easier. I know I rambled there, but anyhow.
No, absolutely. And
Um,
again, that's the point of sport, right? Like sport
yeah.
should be kind of like, I think at times like you see almost the worst side of you in sport, because the
Yeah.
pressure gets to you
Yeah.
or whatever, right? Like adversity hits and you don't, but I also think it's the best side of you as well.
Yeah.
And so if sport is sort of the microcosm of kind of how you're trying to live your life, like this all ties in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Why are you in the UMAC and not the WIAC? Is that a really dumb question? Other than you guys decided you wanted to be part of the UMAC, but is there a rationale for?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is when you look at just kind of like our school profile compared to a lot of really all the other UWs that are in the WIAC, yeah, we're really not that similar. I mean, obviously we're a state school, but
Right.
you know, if you just look at school profile, I think the next biggest, so we're the smallest of any of the schools that were in the WIAC of all 9 schools. Um, the next biggest is River Falls, and I think they're a little over 3 times our size. And so
Okay.
and then everybody there from there on is just giants, right?
Yeah.
So from a resource standpoint, I think it makes sense for us to be, surrounded by schools that have a similar profile. The other part of it is travel. Wisconsin is a bigger state, I think, than maybe we always get credit for, and we're at the very northwest tip of Wisconsin. And so, we did a kind of a study of, so when we're traveling to Whitewater and Oshkosh and Platteville, I mean, these are all 6 hours on a bus, one way.
Far?
Yeah.
Far? Wow.
Yeah.
I never thought of that. I never realized that.
Yeah. And so I think like it was different sport to sport, but I think that like when we did the study, it was something like when we went from the WIAC to the UMAC, our travel in that season, I think the most was basketball. They cut 90 hours of bus travel out of their schedule just in that change.
Just by moving to the UMAC.
Yeah.
Well, that makes sense.
And if you,
that makes total sense.
A 10-week season, that's 9 hours a week. That's a full work day, plus that you could be studying, practicing, social, all that, right? So
all that,
and I think there was, there's always going to be some criticism of that move. To me, it was 100% the right move. I miss, some of my WIAC colleagues and I think some of the, just the competitive vibe in that conference. But I do think that we have found a very good fit and home in the UMAC, and I've seen, I think, some real growth in the UMAC. I think right now, especially, there's a really cool mix of coaches. It's sort of, myself and Greg Wheaton at Northwestern are kind of the most tenured coaches, and he is certainly, I think, the best coach in the conference, and maybe one of the best in the region. But then we have a lot of new young coaches that have a lot of kind of swagger to them, and a lot of excitement, enthusiasm about recruiting. I think that we've already seen a good shift in terms of the competitiveness in the conference. I only think it's going to get better.
What's funny, and is me being on the outside, right? Like as I'm here and I go through the New York a lot, and so I just thought you guys were another SUNY type schools, right? You're all massive, right? Like, and then I was doing, I think it was this morning, I was looking I always look at the campus map, and I do, all this just sort of get a feel. And I didn't realize you were that small. Like, it's in relative terms to the other Wisconsin schools. And I just look at, in my experience, then knowledge mostly is around football because of Wisconsin Whitewater and Mount Union for so many years. And they're just like they're a satellite campus of the University of Wisconsin-Madison, right? And they're the recipients of all the players that want to play, but they can't at Wisconsin, right? You know what I mean? Like, that's sort of the mental. And I thought, oh, you guys are the same way, and it's so not that. I don't want to.
I heard a rumor the other day, Paul, and I don't know if it's true, but like the rumor that I heard was that it's harder to get, or for a time it was harder to get a UW Whitewater football ticket than it was to get a Green Bay Packer football ticket.
You know what? As crazy as, and just goes back to size, as crazy as I remember, like, because you track it for the football. Again, and I watch a lot of D3 sports, period, and I don't. It's not necessarily a healthy thing. I'm into basketball lately, and I know nothing about basketball, but they sell out regularly, like 8,000 plus in. It's a Division III school. You know what I mean? Like, you just sit there, and that's And so it wouldn't surprise me in the least that it would be hard to get tickets there, especially 5 years ago, 6 years ago, when it was maybe a little bit back further, 10 years ago, when Mount Union and Wisconsin Whitewater were the two teams in the country.
Every year, right? They were coming up in the championship.
And they were super good, right? Like, Whitewater was really, really good. And every 8,000, or whatever the number is. I think it's that high, but it's somewhere in there. So that wouldn't surprise me. That's harder to get.
Yeah. Well, and cranking out.
Never buy a football ticket to Wisconsin Whitewater. Come on. I already have a John Carroll hat. How am I going to justify that with my Mount Union folks?
Love it.
All right. I'm going to ask you one last question.
Yeah.
And to bring it back to soccer. And I thought about this yesterday because we talked about the international component to your squad and the school and all that kind of stuff. What does your recruiting class for next year look like, or for 2025 look like, knowing that you might still be up in the air quite a bit because of the international component? Does that make sense?
Yeah. For 2025 specifically, it's going to be a different class because we graduate 14 seniors this year, which is the biggest class we've ever had. And I'm sure, a lot of schools either hit that mark last year or this year with the extra year of eligibility for COVID, right? So this is the last group that has that extra year. So we had, it was a mix. Our senior class was a mix, like almost right down the middle of 4-year guys and 5th-year guys. So anyway, so yeah, graduating 14, it's going to be a big class that comes in. And I think that it's going to, my hope is that we kind of hit the same mark that we kind of have in the past of kind of right down the middle, between domestic guys and international guys, and bringing in, again, being a resource and an opportunity for local and, sort of Midwest guys to have a place to play and hopefully at a good level, and study at a good school. And then, filling our other pieces in with international guys that bring some of that cultural influx and in perspective into our squad. Yeah.
Can I ask, are you looking for 14 guys now? Is that what your class you're looking for, just to replace the 14 are leaving, or do you have a different number in mind? I don't know what your other classes look like. So yeah,
no, it'll probably be something similar to that. I don't think it'll be 14 new freshmen though. We'll probably find a couple of junior college transfers that want to come in. There's at least one school that is closed. We've been talking to a player or two from there. I'm not big on the transfer portal. I understand why it exists, and I don't necessarily judge anybody who uses it. It hasn't been our process. We're much more. Most of our guys are in for 4. But I do think that I think 14 freshmen is too many. Almost half your squad is new. Freshman guys, and what that does then on the other end, we'll be hitting the same problem 4 years from now, right? Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, Coach. Hey, this was probably one of the most awesome conversations I've had over the course of 2 days. I do apologize that we had to break it, but this was awesome. I do appreciate the conversation. I'll have you on anytime. We could talk about anything under the sun. Go back to youth soccer or sports psychology. We could definitely just do that. So, but thank you very much. This was fantastic.
Well, thank you, Paul. I mean, 100%. This is my pleasure, and I'll echo that. One of the best conversations I've had all week, man. And so thank you for that. Yeah.
All right, so I'll get this up today, and then we'll keep talking. Now that I know where you live, man. Yeah, I won't stop bothering you. So.
Hey, if you ever want to come out to the Midwest and do something on the ground here, to do a little tour, go see Tudor and Casey at Eau Claire, whatever, and come up for preseason, do something like that. Like, let me know, man. We'll put you up and we'll take good care of you.
So I work with the Catholic Church and Catholic. So you guys are a territory. So like I said, I was in Ohio, and I always threaten, like, I'm going to go up to Michigan and check out, and, like, there's some folks there, and I thought I should just really hunker down for an entire week and just sort of do a loop around, get out to Chicago, and so anyhow.
Yeah. Well, come up. Superior's awesome. Got a beautiful cathedral. I'll put you in touch with Father Andy, man. He's the man. He's got his own podcast. He's the podcast padre. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Is that true? What's his name?
Andy Ritchie. Yeah. Or I guess Father Andrew Ritchie. So it's kind of goofy. He was the priest in my church growing up. And he was, the young priest. I think he was right out of seminary, and then moved to Superior. And like a year later is when I started at UW Superior. So kind of crazy. But look him up, or I could send you some info on him. But great dude.
I got him right here. The Diocese of Superior. I got him. Yeah, he's ordained in '97. Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Now it's like I got to put you a pin in the map, like,
do it. Yeah, absolutely.
Wait till August, right? Preseason, and I could pretend to participate in preseason training. And
oh, love it. We'll make it all work. Yeah. Hey, and if you're serious about if you want to get in touch with with either Zach or Randy, our psychology guys,
I'm serious. I would love to have them on. That would just be so again, just because as we talked, like how big of a deal I do think it is, and it's an opportunity, I think, for programs to really elevate. You know what I mean? Like what are
Yeah,
the things that are going to differentiate? This is one of those things that could be or could elevate your team. So,
absolutely.
yeah. So
Hey,
connect
last
me.
thing, if
Yep.
yeah, if you could send me your address too, I'll make sure we get you a little swag so you can
Ah,
you can rep the Yellow Jackets out there. All
yeah,
right?
yeah, definitely, definitely. All
Yeah.
right, Coach. Thank you.
Hey, my pleasure, Paul. Thank you so much.
Yep.
Take care.